Have you ever noticed that just as quickly as you fall in love, you can just as quickly fall out of love? Why is that? Could it be that what we call love is often something other than love? We often confuse many things with love, in particular attraction and infatuation. So to be in love with someone usually means that we're infatuated. Infatuation is essentially a very intense form of attraction because we're not merely attracted to the person, but also to an idea of that person, an illusion, a fantasy. Attraction usually begins with what we see. We're attracted initially to the outward appearance, the body, the face, the way a person dresses, and so on. And then there comes the attraction to the personality, the qualities and characteristics that we see within the person, as well as their interests and opinions and this sort of thing. But we also have a tendency to imagine things about the person which aren't really there, or aren't really accurate, or we overemphasize their positive qualities while downplaying or even overlooking their negative ones. Or it may be that we carry within us a certain picture in our mind of what the perfect partner would be like, and we project that ideal onto every person that we find ourselves attracted to. Being so emotionally overwhelmed by our infatuation, we think that we're in love, and if we're lucky, the other person feels the same way. And so the relationship ensues. But over time, as we get to know the person more and more, we begin to notice that they aren't living up to our imagined ideals, our desires, our expectations. Or the attraction is based so much on the newness of the relationship, the mystery and excitement, that once we begin to feel comfortable and we know the other so well that they become predictable, that excitement is no longer there. And so the attraction begins to wither. And without the attraction, we might find ourselves becoming disinterested, or in some cases, even repulsed by the other. And it isn't because the love has begun to fade, but rather because it wasn't about love in the first place. If love is the foundation of a relationship, then the relationship survives the ebb and flow of attraction. Because there will be times when attraction is very high and times when it's low, depending on a number of various circumstances. And that's the nature of attraction. But love is consistent. And if it's genuine, it doesn't fade. The truth is that no one falls out of love. We fall out of infatuation. We fall out of attraction. Or rather, the haze of infatuation dissipates, which allows us to see the situation a little more clearly. It's at that point that we get to find out whether there is any love at all, or was it only infatuation? But we need to be discerning, because there's also another feeling that we often confuse for love, and that's attachment. Sometimes when the infatuation fades, we realize that the relationship is all wrong for us, but we can't seem to let it go. Even if we're both driving each other absolutely crazy, for some strange reason we can't bear to imagine being apart from one another. Or maybe what we're really afraid of is being alone. And sometimes we feel that it's better to be with someone, anyone, than it is to be alone. But that's not really love, that's insecurity. And attachment isn't always about the other person specifically. Often it's about the idea of being in a relationship. So really, it could be anyone. It just happens to be the person who was most readily available at the time. But if someone seemingly better shows up, we're often ready to make that switch. In fact, we'll often fantasize about that imaginary someone else and yearn for the day that they show up. But in the meantime, we stay with the person we're with, not because we're genuinely in love with them, but because we can't stand the idea of being alone. Or it might be that we're attached to the idea of the person, not who they actually are, but who they could potentially become. They're not who we want them to be, but we stay in the relationship with the hope that eventually they'll change. We know that if they were just different in this way or that way, that the relationship would work out. So we keep holding on, hoping and waiting. But the reality is that people seldom change. Certainly the potential is there. But it's a fantasy to think that they're going to live up to that potential. At some point we need to wake up. What all of this really boils down to is this fear of being alone. And if we really want to have relationships that are realistic and healthy, we need to be willing to face that fear, to go into it, to explore it and understand it. And of course, no one wants to do that because it's scary. So we just go on reliving the same unhealthy patterns over and over again with different people. Or maybe we find that special someone who we spend the rest of our lives with, unhappily ever after. But when you get tired of all that and you really want to see a positive change in your life, in your relationships, be willing to spend some time alone getting to know yourself, learning to cultivate your own self-love and respect, learning to be emotionally independent, unattached to expectations. And when you do that, you'll naturally raise your standards. You'll be more selective in who you engage with. You won't be rushing into relationships out of a sense of desperation. You'll be willing to take time to really evaluate the situation, to really get to know the other person. And you won't put up with any nonsense. And when you do meet someone who you really connect with deeply and authentically, you'll notice that the overall quality of your relationships improve.